Okay.
We're not worried about it.
I'm not going to cut you guys off early, but I'm not going to stay here till 2 o'clock.
That works for me.
Okay, here's our
It's like so glary.
Yeah.
Everyone, a couple little changes. I got a couple more
for
to
the audio
switch
than
to
it is.
December
Tilt
6th.
a
So
little
now
bit.
we do have 6 talks scheduled
Like
that
down?
day.
No,
We'll see if we
sideways.
can get through them all. Emily's going to be the last person to talk that
sometimes.
day. And if she goes
Sometimes it
over,
helps.
Yeah, it's not down.
for next Tuesday, do you have organic chemistry lab in here?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No,
So
we
yeah.
should be finishing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, you should stay for Emily's talk if you can, but if you have class at 2 somewhere else across campus, you're excused if you have to leave. So. At least one person's going to present during finals. Like again, this is not meant to be a stressful thing. This is a learning opportunity for you guys
Need the time.
become an expert in a
I'm so
topic.
busy right
Convey
now.
that excitement that you found while doing that to your classmates. So feel free to postpone any of these people here. If you need to postpone the last minute even, that's fine with me. Again, I don't care one way or another. Although I'll check the World Cup schedule.
Deb gets it.
Deb gets it, yeah.
All right. So,
We almost didn't come in today. I'm gonna let you know that right now. Like it,
Yeah, I almost tuned into the Zoom so we could.
he conned me into coming in because I was like, oh yeah, they're
All right. Just so you know, we're gonna just 2 talks today. Then Sophie will go first, and then Blake. After that, if you're curious, are you gonna present today?
For lab?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Emily's you're gonna give your presentation in here though.
Okay.
All right?
Sure.
I don't have your presentation yet. do I?
I just sent it to you.
After the 2 talks in here, Emily's going to talk about her lab project. We're going to do it in here just because the screen's up and running and things like that. So we'll do that right after these 2 talks. If you're not in the lab, if you're in the lab, you have to stay. Okay. If you're not in the lab, you're welcome to stay if you want to hear about what Emily did. That's perfectly
Birds. How long do we have to talk about our lab stuff?
I love
birds.
5, 8, 20 minutes, whatever you want.
However long it takes to talk about.
Yeah,
that was every number. I'll see you guys next Wednesday.
How many guys have looked at your take-home final exam?
It's open right now on my computer.
All right, so again, just so you know, you need to summarize 6 student presentations.
You're right.
If you want to be efficient, you can bring your computers in here and summarize as we go. I'm going to record these because I almost forgot to, which means I have to log in.
I only have one final exam that's actually during that week. Final exams, and it's on Thursday, so it should be good to make a presentation for that.
more miles is my last one.
Really?
Right, I never needed it. What? Yeah, I messed up now. I had one. It just died.
And then we just have to turn in Deb's final. Be-
Desktop now. Oh my God, like every new laptop.
Got plenty of time for that one.
So tonight and tomorrow I have to grade the papers for biodiversity lab. But then Thursday through whenever this weekend is all more math.
Yeah, that's probably how I'm going to treat it. That and I have to get a homework done for a different class by Tuesday, but that's not going to be too difficult.
I got
We're
sustainability.
running. Max, do you have a little card too? Kimberly?
Oh. Sorry.
That's up here. I just
Oh, wait, oh my God.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, so I did my paper on water birds and if they are preferring artificial or natural wetlands. So just kind of figuring out if they have a preference to it or not, or if there's something else that's really interfering with the turnout at each artificial or natural wetland. So in the first paper, it was at Sri Lanka, it's a country in Asia. So the first thing they kind of wanted to point out was that the waterbird population was just depleting. It wasn't really thriving, and that's kind of because of the natural wetlands and how they're kind of depleting and they're being replaced with artificial, and the birds aren't really showing up at the artificial ones, so we don't know kind of what's happening there. So they wanted to use the water birds to study the habitat complexity. So that means diversity and abundance, which is making the habitat complex, obviously. You obviously want a decent amount of different species of water birds just to make it a higher functioning habitat, and then a lot of diversity within those species. So for this first paper, the species observed overall between the natural and artificial wetlands was 68, but there were species that they only saw at the natural and the artificial. So they saw 8 that were only at the natural and 1 at only the artificial. I didn't get numbers for the amount of birds they saw just because the paper wouldn't let me access that. Don't know why, but in the second paper, it was at Chongming Island in China. So observed, there were 120,113 birds that were there overall, and that included 78 species. So they had a decent turnout with this specific study. With this graph, they kind of went in a single year. So it was October, I want to say it was like October 2000 to October 2001. They studied throughout different seasons, and based on the location of this pond, their busy season was spring, autumn, and a little bit into winter. That's just when the birds were there. So obviously summer didn't have a huge turnout. Spring, so our natural, we called it tidelands, our natural obviously had a bigger turnout in the spring and autumn and summer even. Winter, they didn't really see a huge difference. And then, yeah, so the artificial specifically, it was, for spring and autumn, it was less than half or half. And then artificial and natural, they saw 16.2% of that population were at artificial, and the natural had 83.8%. In paper 3, we had the Yellow River Delta, that's also in China. They took different surveys, so their surveys consisted of 8 to 10 day periods all throughout October and May, so it was monthly. They went out every month, kind of so they didn't disturb the naturalness of the birds. They didn't want to like scare them off and mess up their numbers kind of. It was usually on sunny or low wind days, so they did kind of go out on specific weather days just for the better turnout. So overall, they saw 308,910 water birds, and they had 80 species. And within those species, they saw 73 species at the natural wetlands, and 92.2% of the population they saw. And then they saw 58 species at the artificial wetlands, and that was about 7.8% of the numbers. So clearly, there is some natural draw towards the natural wetlands. So just to go over those papers again, we have the paper 1, we had the used ducks for habitat complexity and measuring that. The species in the only found in natural wetlands were 8, and then species found in only artificial were 1. In paper 2, we had artificial wetlands at 16.2% of the birds found, and natural wetlands had 83.8%. And they varied in seasons, so they went through summer, autumn, winter, spring. And paper 3, they had survey conditions. In natural, they had 92.2%, and artificial, they had 7.8%. So clearly, throughout all these papers, there was a draw towards the natural wetlands. So something I kind of looked up on my own alone from this, none of these papers really mention this, typical water bird behavior and that included homing. So homing specifically, it varies in breeds, and it's usually specifically female canvasbacks. 75% of them will go back to the pond they breed in normally, and they stay there, and that's where they are. So once again, it varies in breeds, but this is a natural behavior. So this kind of has to be taken into consideration when looking at these numbers. So the three main takeaways I found were homing is a natural waterbird behavior, and natural wetlands are automatically more suitable environment. It's clear in the numbers that that's what the birds prefer. And that there are some species that actually prefer the artificial wetlands. So in the one study where we had only one species at the artificial wetlands, that's what they preferred. That's just what some birds like, I guess. So then what do we do about it? So there's promising data that artificial wetlands can work. I'm not saying that these papers kind of like destroy the artificial wetlands. I think they're definitely a possibility. However, promoting this will lead to the depletion of the natural wetlands. If we realize that all these artificial wetlands are just working super well, which they aren't working super well, but they are an option, the natural wetlands will be gone like that, which are statistically better than the artificial wetlands. Here are my citations in my papers. Any questions?
Okay. So I know you can like train some birds to home.
Yeah.
Have they been doing that with the artificial to try to encourage them, or are they just kind of?
They had not mentioned training at all. No, I think they were strictly studying like which, they studied species and the amount of ducks that actually came to each. And they were pretty close to each other, so it was in the same area.
So mine might be multiple parts. So artificial wetlands, there was not an original wetland here and we made one, or reconstructed wetlands that may have been there, were destroyed, and they rebuilt them?
It did not say, but
Okay.
it did say that they were all in close proximity to each other. So that's kind of all it, and really just that artificial.
Okay, because these are from Sri Lanka and China?
Yeah.
Because I know the US, we have it has to be certain standards, so I'd be curious if.
I bet these were new, just if they're calling them artificial, they probably weren't restored, but it's a good question.
Yeah.
What was that one bird that did like the artificial wetlands in that?
I don't remember the species. They varied, all the species kind of varied through the study, so it's kind of weird seeing there was one species I think that was in the natural in the 8-to-1 study, but then that went to the artificial in the other study. So it was kind of like, the species were kind of all over the place. That's the only reason I didn't put them in there, because they weren't super consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would a response be to find a new niche? Like they built a brand new one and a bird moved in they're trying to find their own new niche for an area, or?
I guess, yeah, I'm curious about this myself, because I don't know, like the ponds in Rolla, like the center pond, I see geese there, and that's about it. And occasionally a duck or two.
Yeah.
In Schumann Park, which has been around a lot longer, I still don't see many birds there.
Yeah.
I drove to Oklahoma this weekend, and I saw all the ponds and lakes I saw there had a big diversity of ducks.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if it's just a different flyway or if those have been there longer. I'm just
Yeah.
curious.
It also could be the time of year, because I know most water birds fly south.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it just kind of depends. And I read something, it depended on the species, how far south they went, so.
Right. I mean, our field station pond, for those of you who've been out there, I'm just surprised there's not more ducks out there. There are some on occasion, but again, a similar pond in Oklahoma would be not covered, but there'd be 3 or 4 species of ducks and 50 of them out there.
Yeah.
Which just seems sparse here. All right, other questions? Why did you pick this topic?
I wanted to do something with animals that didn't live in the water. So I know we've been studying a lot of fish. Yeah. We've been studying a lot of the protists and the bacteria in the water. So I wanted to kind of see a bigger size animal and their impact on it.
All right, thank you very much. You know I saw that you have 31 slides, I was a little worried, but then I figured it was gonna be another one of these animated, engaging talks.
Yes.
Where'd you get these ducks? Are these?
Online.
Look like the duck hunt.
Oh, yeah.
The duck hunt gun.
Alright.
Duck hunt.
Next up.
Ducks.
Yeah, they should have like the gun that you put on the TV.
My dad fucking loved it. His favorite part was the dog when you missed. They would come up and laugh. He
You could
fucking
shoot
thought
the dog.
he thought that was the funniest fucking thing ever.
No, it's not loaded.
You could shoot the dog in that game.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't. I just don't remember.
Since you sent me the link,
Yes.
you went and downloaded it yourself then?
I mean, it's Google Slides, so.
Yeah, that's how they do it. You want me to log into my email and then access it?
We can see if this works.
No, let me do that. I just,
We should just make everything.
yeah, you sent me the link earlier, and I thought that was I think
Oh my god, dude! So I did Fitch's presentation today.
Yeah.
I just sent it to you.
That's not bitch.
Yeah, no, that makes sense now. 'Cause I think-
Well, they're just being a dick.
He's always a dick. I can't fucking stand him. But so he talks for a few minutes beforehand. So the presentation is supposed to be 10 to 12 minutes.
Uh-huh.
But then there's switch time. Some people have to, because he never specified only turn it in this way, only turn it in either PowerPoint or Google Slides, nothing.
Sure.
So everybody had their own damn way. Some people were presenting from Zoom and like trying to share a screen. So there was a lag in the switch over time. So class ran long because I'm like, and they cut the last people off short because you can't fucking make a decision and set a standard.
Hey, it's gotta be a fucking PowerPoint.
I mean, it would have been that fucking simple, but no.
Well, it is that fucking simple.
Well done, bud.
I'm not looking forward to taking that class. Just needed something to throw down.
Honestly, I think he's got a lot of knowledge. He's just a twat.
It's $100 this is showing up on the recording. I just think it's funny.
There's nothing I would not say to his face. Like, I'm not gonna talk about somebody behind their back without being able. I absolutely would.
I love it.
All right, next up, Blake Moore.
Alright, I'm gonna be talking about the effects of road salt on freshwater ecosystems. So a little bit of background on road salt. Missouri currently uses sodium chloride on the roads. They use a mixture of brine, so they do 23.3% of the salt in water, and they spray that on the road to try to prevent as much sodium chloride, but they still spread salt using the classic salt spreader, and that provides a lot more salt, and it runs off, and it's very good for the environment, as you will see shortly. Just a little bit of how much MoDOT uses. They use 150,000 tons of salt a year. So that's throughout the entire state, and they're not like a northern state, so you can only imagine how much northern states like Montana, Wisconsin, and stuff are using. They're using 150,000 tons. So this looks like a lot of words. I just wanted to add it because it has all the statistical analysis that was ran, so all my statistical friends, you can read that. I'm not going to bore you guys with it. So this study looked at zooplankton and phytoplankton at different concentrations of sodium chloride, which is the main component of road salt. So they did this by a stream in Canada or a pond in Canada. They sectioned it off, and they added different amounts of chloride to it. You have a 500 and 1,000. I forget like how much that actually is, but it's like increasing the concentration. The total abundance of zooplankton goes down the more you add. The same with dry weight and the number of taxa. And then copepods, they do not like it at all. There's this big drop and then kind of flattens out, so those can withstand more, but not a big amount. Same with the phytophthorans and conifers. And this I found interesting. The phytoplankton and the protists, they like salt, which I guess it adds more nutrients to the water for them. I'm not for sure. And the different dots, so they added nutrients to the water to see if that had an effect. And for all the zooplankton, it didn't, so that's why there's one line. But the protists and phytoplankton, there was a little bit of a difference. So the circle, they added nutrients, and in the triangle, they did not add nutrients. And the richness for the phytoplankton, it stayed relatively the same. I mean, it changed a little bit, but not anything drastic. All right, and this was another study that did something similar, but they were also testing global warming with it. So this still shows, this is just zooplankton, this isn't phytoplankton produce as well. So this is just showing the freshwater and saltwater, and the white boxes are unheated, and then the gray boxes are heated. They increased the temperature by 5 or 10 degrees Celsius. See if that had any change in the amount of zooplankton that are in the water. And as you can see, with from fresh to salt, there is a big difference in all of them. That means they are not liking the salt water at all. All right, and then on to the frogs that live in the freshwater. So most amphibians reproduce in small ponds. And this study looked at frogs that reproduce in these small ponds, and that some are by the roadside, so they have the runoff going into those ponds, and they looked at some that are deep in the woods that don't have any kind of that kind of stuff. This is just basically saying that high enough concentrations of salt, it can kill the frogs, and low concentrations that had some morphological or some physiological things that happen to the frogs and other stuff. So salt will cause edema in frogs. So this is a normal frog, and this is a frog that has edema. So it's basically swelling and fluid buildup in the body. I do believe this is the tissue. These two are the tissues with the edema, and these two aren't. I don't know why they're like that. But I'm not a big tissue guy, so I'm not for sure. And it didn't really explain very much. This is a cut into picture of the frog just to check that the reproductive glands or stuff is okay. And this one is a size comparison for breeding water ponds with spring water and roadsides, woodlands. Didn't talk much in the study about that. Like, it was very confusing for that stuff, but this stuff was a little more graspable. So this is more statistical evidence of stuff. I figured it'd be important for people that want to read it. I'm not going to get too much into it. Let's go over what is briefly said. So this study was also happened in the Northeast, where a lot of salt is used on the roads. So then I'll go to this one. So it has three different levels of edema. So the swelling amount. So 1 means there is no edema present, so they're not swollen. 2 is a moderate amount, and 3 is an extreme amount of edema. And you can see that in the roadsides, it has a lot more on the 2 and the 3 than in the woodlands, where it's mostly just 1, where there's no edema present. And then this looked at the how far they can jump based on like the level of edema. Didn't have much in the Southern Connecticut study, but there was a little bit of decrease in this study. And then this showed the amount of edema and then the specific conductivity of the water. As you can see, as the specific conductivity increases, the edema also. So overall conclusion, salt's really bad for the water. It decreases the zooplankton and also affects the amphibians. These phytoplankton might like it, but that would lead to more fish kills and stuff because they like to take all the oxygen from the water. And then solutions to this, we can do an alternative to road salt, like the brine is using less. And there's also some stuff on the market now that costs a lot more, but it doesn't affect the environment, kind of like salt does. But with salt, like, it's pretty cheap for MoDOT to buy. It's like $100 a ton. I found some alternatives that are like $500 a ton. If they're buying 150,000 tons, and you could use less salt. So that's what the brine
cars also
is.
worse for
Instead of
roads, and
using
it's worse for your cars, and it's also worse for animals.
3% of the salt, and it makes
It's like, it's just a
stay
worse
on the road
for
better.
everything.
It's not wash off.
I used to sell
These are
rock
the
salt
3
at
studies I
a
used.
hardware store, magnesium
They're
chloride,
all
so
fairly
I
new
could
studies, so 22, 21, 22. All right. Any questions?
So what was the purpose between the big and the
They were trying to see if global warming had an impact with the salt that they're using. I didn't really focus too much on that because I wasn't interested in it. But yeah, it's something to do with global warming.
Back to those results, because that sounds pretty. Like there was, for the fresher waters, there was an effect of the heating too, right?
Right, yeah.
So that lowered the abundance and the biomass of the zooplankton, I guess, right?
Right, but the richness it did not affect.
Right, okay. Go back to one slide or two. Yeah, for this one then, did they mention like,
It works in gold.
when I first saw this, I,
Good.
you know, when there's more abundance of phytoplankton in that top right panel there,
It works
My
in
first
colder environments, but it's
instinct
not
was,
good for things.
it's 'cause all the
chemicals
cocopods are
on, like
Right.
deposits of animal
yeah, did they mention that in the
I
paper?
think so, yeah.
Yeah, I would look into that for your paper at least. That'd be an interesting mechanism, is, you know,
I trust
maybe
this
rosal
source more than
leads
I
to
did the other
more
ones.
fish kills without even a nutrient effect. It's just that you've gotten rid of the grazers. Again, grazing in lake systems is sort of a hot topic as to whether, you know, they call it a trophic cascade. The zooplankton are controlling your algae. It's a great thing, because then you don't have to worry about it. But if it's copepods going
I
down,
don't trust.
it's gonna be a
Yeah, I don't trust you walking live or like some of these other. Yeah. I wanted to find something
Other
that.
questions?
Trust me, because I sold it for 2 years.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Well, I'm curious about the actual effects of. Yeah. All right.
All right, good. All right, so if you want to leave, you can. Okay. Go quietly.
We can make it home in time.
And then Emily's gonna start here in a couple of minutes. Oh,